Hello, here's Bruno Kaufmann. I'm the Global Democracy Correspondent for the Swiss Broadcasting Company, and I'm today in Whanganui, New Zealand, together with Steve Barron. And Steve, can you just present you?
Hi, I'm Steve Barron. I run Better Democracy in New Zealand. I've written a couple of books about direct democracy here in New Zealand. I've campaigned for binding referendums, and it's kept me pretty busy over the last 10 or 15 years.
And how come? I mean, we are here in Whanganui. It's a small place. It's about 40,000 inhabitants. You are active politically here, but you are still very active for direct democracy in the whole of New Zealand. What is the background for your activity?
When I first started my direct democracy campaign, I was living in Auckland at the time, and associating with a friend or two who were politically active and politically minded, we got talking about direct democracy and the lack of real democracy in New Zealand. I think in New Zealand, although we're one of the most democratic places in the world, we pay lip service a lot to democracy.
Mm-hmm. What's the main problem? I mean, you said in all international rankings, New Zealand is in the top 10. I just saw a list of direct democracies. Switzerland is first, Uruguay second, Lithuania third, and then New Zealand. And you still feel there is very little of direct democracy here.
The real trouble is referendums are not binding in New Zealand. They're only advisory. The government has ignored every single referendum we've had. I've lost count now. I think there have been 7 or 8 referendums, and although they've been quite adamant what the people wanted, the government ignored it each time. So to me, that's just lip service. It's not real democracy. It's like having a vote for members of parliament, but we don't have to listen to them.
And how are the New Zealanders reacting to that? I mean, as you said, having an election, it's just advisory, and the government would say, thank you for the vote, but we are not respecting it. Are the New Zealanders accepting this kind of advisory vote?
I don't think they like it. I would say 7 or 8 out of 10 people would think that referendums should be binding. It would be interesting to have a referendum in New Zealand to see if we want referendums to be binding. I actually initiated a referendum back in 2004 on the same subject, but in New Zealand we have to collect 10% of those registered on the electoral roll to trigger a referendum. That's over 350,000 signatures, and you need an army to collect that many signatures. It was almost impossible, and we didn't achieve it.
Yeah. Can you tell me something about how is the process of gathering signatures here? Can you do it freely everywhere? What do you need in order to make a valid signature?
You have to collect those signatures on an authorised piece of paper, and they have to be written. It can't be digital. It has to be on the original authorised petition paper.
Mm-hmm. And this paper is given to you, or you have to produce it yourself?
We have to produce it ourselves, but there are requirements, things that have to be present on there. They're then delivered to the clerk of the House, and the clerk of the House checks those signatures. They take a portion of them and they check to see that they're all valid. Quite often many people vote twice. Many people that signed the petition are not on the electoral roll, so their signature doesn't count. So it makes it very, very difficult.
When it comes to democracy in this country, of course, it's not only about having a vote on issues. You have also elections every 3rd year. Is this a good way of having so often a national election?
Well, 3 years isn't very long for a good government, but it's a long, long time for a very bad government. And the thing is, a lot of water can pass under the bridge. A lot of decisions can be made which we can't change later on. And I just believe we need more say on controversial issues, polarising issues, that members of parliament aren't any more qualified than you or I to make a decision on. Usually moral type issues. And we've seen over the years that the morals of a lot of members of parliament haven't been very moralistic.
We have seen in many countries that poorly representative government in a way has created a big gap between the elected and electors. Many people don't feel that the system really represents them. Is that similar here?
I think to a certain extent. And the trouble is, when you elect a government, you don't believe in everything that one particular government wants to do. I might be passionate about this policy, but I may totally dislike this policy of that government. And the trouble is we can't pick and choose the good ones and the bad ones. Governments get out of touch with what the majority of people want in the country. They're not truly representative, and that's the real problem.
New Zealand is a country quite isolated geographically, far away, an island. Which countries are you looking for getting inspiration?
I would say Switzerland is no doubt the bastion of direct democracy. The way the government runs, the government makes decisions knowing that the people of Switzerland can change that. So they're more in tune with what the public wants, and they don't do outlandish, they don't make outlandish policies. It has to be congruent with what the people want. So that would be my explanation.
There are quite some Swiss expats here in this country. Have you met people who can vote in Switzerland at the same time they're living here and being natural allies for you?
The Swiss people that I've met here in New Zealand find it rather strange that we have referendums, but they're not binding. The government doesn't have to listen to those referendums, and they think it's very funny.
Now we are here in Whanganui. It's one of the, let's say...
Whanganui.
Yeah, sorry.
Whanganui.
Say it.
Whanganui.
Whanganui.
It's an aspirated H.
Yes, that will be very difficult for me, but you can tell us a little bit about this place.
Whanganui has a population of about 42,000 people. It's a very close-knit community. There's a very active community. There's a real core of people that are interested in what happens in the community. We have a high turnout for voting compared to most districts in New Zealand. We're probably one of the highest for local body elections and probably even for national elections. Although it's very much a working class community in the central area itself, outside of the city limits, so to speak, is mostly rural, and that tends to be National Party supporters. So although we're very much a Labour Party electorate, the National Party is the Member of Parliament here.
So would you say that Whanganui is something like a New Zealand in miniature? Like a small New Zealand?
I think it's probably fairly representative of the rest of New Zealand in many ways. We perhaps don't have many immigrants here compared to Auckland or Wellington.
Now you are active here and you want to in a way influence through your activity also this local politics. Does direct democracy plays into that?
Not a great deal, but I ran a campaign recently to have the voting system for the local district council change from first past the post to the STV voting system. Under the Government Act, you can only have one or the other. At present, it's first past the post. On a national basis, New Zealand is mixed member proportional, which is very much like Germany, so we call it MMP. So if your party gets 10% of the vote, it gets 10% of the seats, 10% of the power in Parliament. But the local member of Parliament is still chosen by first past the post. The mayor and the councillors are chosen by first past the post, and I feel that that's quite antiquated. So I put a proposal to council, the council voted, and they just decided to put it to a referendum at the next council election. So we will be having a referendum to decide whether we want first past the post or the single transferable vote, and that's binding.
So will that be the first local referendum here you experience?
It would, well, I guess technically you would probably call that a plebiscite because it was initiated by the council themselves. You can initiate a citizens' referendum if you collect 5% of the signatures of those on the electoral roll, but it's not binding on the council. There have been in the past a large number of plebiscites. Previous Mayor Michael Laws wanted to put proposals to the voters about doing this project or that project. They weren't very clear cut. The wording wasn't the best. There was one referendum where you could choose between 4 different projects, which really meant that none of them were very clear cut as to which one the people really wanted. Yes, this one got more votes than the others, but if you combine the others, then it was a majority against the most preferred project. So people didn't really know what was the most preferred project. But that was some years ago now, and we haven't had any referendums here since.
So this will be a binding referendum.
This will be a binding referendum. The previous ones were really only plebiscites, and some of them were introduced, some of them weren't.
To conclude, what are your expectations for making New Zealand's democracy more democratic in the future?
I really think we need to change the voting system for the way we elect members of parliament, at least the electorate members of parliament. It really needs to be STV. The way we elect our mayor and our councillors should be STV. Our current mayor has 39% of the vote. Now, he's a very popular mayor, but you could argue that 61% of the population don't actually like him. They could think he's the worst mayor ever. I don't actually believe that's true, but it's a possibility. So I think the mayor himself would like to have a mandate, a clear-cut decision, and the only way you can get a clear-cut majority is through STV voting. And of course referendums, what's the point in having a referendum, a citizens-initiated referendum, if those referendums aren't going to be binding? It's a waste of time and a waste of money, and it's not very democratic.